The dark, disturbing, and illegal video game Iceberg? Let's go. Doki Doki Literature Club. On the surface, Doki Doki Literature Club looks like a harmless anime-style dating sim. 4 cute girls, high school poetry, and some lighthearted conversations. But beneath that colorful exterior lies something much darker. Doki Doki Literature Club was created by Dan Salvato, an American game developer and programmer, and was released on September 22nd of 2017. And it was secretly a psychological horror game that began by luring players into a false sense of comfort. You join your childhood friend Sayori in the school's literature club and meet Yuri, Natsuki, and Monika, each with their own personality and charm. You write poems, build friendships, and choose who to spend time with. But that's when things start to break. What began as a cute visual novel becomes a disturbing descent into psychological horror. We're talking the no-no word that starts with an S, obsession, mind control, and a self-aware character who manipulates the game and you from the inside out. Doki Doki Literature Club is infamous for its tonal whiplash and hidden content. It doesn't rely on jump scares or gore. Instead, it slowly peels away the bright exterior to expose themes of mental illness, emotional manipulation, and AI-driven existential dread. And it does all this while making you feel responsible for the chaos that unfolds. And the game isn't just unsettling, it's also kind of deeply invasive, but in a good way, as the game even reaches into your local files, deletes characters, and leaves cryptic messages for you. Doki Doki isn't just playing tricks, it's actually watching you. When They Cry. When They Cry, also known as Higurashi no Nakakoro ni, was released on August 10th of 2002 and developed by a small indie group called 07th Expansion. When They Cry is structured like a visual novel, but instead of a single storyline, it loops again and again. Each chapter ends in violence, paranoia, and betrayal, only for the timeline to reset and unravel all over again, with slight changes that make you question who's really innocent. Characters go from adorable to demonic in seconds. One moment they're laughing with you, the next they're clawing their own throats out or accusing you of crimes you don't even remember committing. The horror isn't just physical, it's psychological as well. When They Cry messes with your memory, perception, and trust. No one knows what's real. You're constantly second-guessing yourself. Even the player isn't immune to their gaslighting. Are the characters possessed, paranoid, or is it all in your own head? Despite the cutesy art style, the game explores brutal murder, mental breakdowns, torture, child abuse, and systematic corruption. There's blood, yes, but it's in the emotional unraveling that hits the hardest. And with each loop, the sense of hopelessness grows, until you realize this isn't a horror game, it's a ritual, one meant to trap you in fear over and over and over again. And if you end up happening to like this game, you can always check out the anime. Now, there is no official sponsor for today's video, so make sure to check out Gamer Subs. They got plenty of good flavors, lots of awesome waifu cups, and some amazing merch. And if that interests any of you guys, make sure to check out that link down below in the description and use code CRAZY. Get that money off, don't be a sucker and pay full price. So with that said, back to the video. Postal. Postal shocked the world in 1997. While on the surface, it looks like a simple isometric shooter. But the deeper you dig, the stranger, darker, and more unsettling it becomes. The game was developed by a small Arizona-based studio called Running with Scissors, founded in 1996 by Vince Desi. Before Postal, the team mostly worked on licensed cartoon and children's games, so the sudden shift to a hyper-violent shooter shocked almost everyone. Postal itself was released in 1997, where you play as a mysterious postal guy, a man who believes society has collapsed and that everyone is infected. There's no real story, no dialogue, just cryptic narration about paranoia. And then there's the ending. After raiding the Air Force Base, he is shown attempting to massacre an elementary school. And despite everything he tries, his weapons have no effect on the children. And after being laughed at by the kids, he suffers a mental breakdown and ends up getting restrained in a mental asylum. And a voice gives a report on his mental state and suggests that the stress of urban life may have been the root cause of his rampage, prompting him to go postal. And of course, this game was extremely controversial, especially with what happened in numerous schools in the years following. Hatred. No story, no heroes, just pure, unfiltered violence. Released in 2015 by Destructive Creations, Hatred puts you in the shoes of a nameless mass murderer. Your only goal? Kill as many innocent people as possible before the cops take you down. The game is drenched in black and white visuals, interrupted only by vivid red blood like a living, violent Nor comic. There's no justification or narration to soften the brutality. It's chaos and death for death's sake. Hatred was temporarily removed from Steam Greenlight due to its content, only to be reinstated after a public debate about artistic freedom and censorship. But many saw it as glorifying violence without consequence. It refuses to give players any moral context. There are no survivors, no redemption, just a nihilistic spree that's uncomfortable to watch, let alone play. The mechanics reward aggression and brutality. You shoot civilians, set off explosions, and outrun police forces in a desperate last stand. The cold mechanical gameplay matches the game's bleak worldview. Unlike other shooters where you're the hero, in Hatred, you're a villain without any excuse or motive, just pure destructive rage. Hatred asks one question: what happens when the game strips away empathy entirely? The answer is a disturbing mirror into our darkest impulses. Yandere Simulator. Deceptively cute, but also deeply disturbing. Yandere Simulator, developed by Yandere Dev, was first made publicly available as a debug build on April 1st of 2014, and still in early access to this day. It looks like a cutesy anime dating sim, but underneath is a twisted sandbox of psychological horror. You can clean up murder scenes, hide corpses in incinerators, and frame other students for your crimes. It's sociopathy in a school uniform. And that's just what's in the game. While the game claims to explore obsession and mental illness, many players feel it veers into fetish territory, especially with mechanics like panty shots, underage characters, and themes that border on outright exploitation. This game has been banned on Twitch due to violent and sexual themes, and the developer Yandere Dev has faced years of controversy for questionable content, toxic community management, and disturbing statements. He built a community, then repeatedly attacked it. Screenshots of him insulting fans, banning anyone who questions him, and melting down over criticism. That became his public personality. Multiple modders and volunteers claim they put in free work, code, assets, level designs, you name it, only for Yandere Dev to reject, delete, or quietly reuse pieces without credit. The narrative that he uses the community as disposable labor is one of the longest running accusations around him. He doesn't really react to criticism very well. Anyone offering him help is a threat. Anyone improving his idea is competition. And anyone that points out his flaws is harassing him. The developer's own insecurity honestly hurt the project more than any technical limitations ever did. Welcome to the Game. Welcome to the Game is a 2016 psychological horror game by Reflex Studios, where you play as an ordinary person exploring the deep web in search of the Red Room, a rumored live streaming site where people are tortured and killed. The entire game takes place on your computer screen. You use a virtual browser to explore websites that may or may not be real, each one filled with disturbing imagery, cryptic clues, and puzzles. And while you're doing all this, while you're going farther and farther into the abyss, someone is watching you. The game mimics a real computer, desktop, and internet browser. The websites you visit are unnervingly believable, with message boards, hitman services, drug markets, cult pages, all written in a tone that feels pretty authentic. All this while you are completely alone in your apartment. There's no weapons or allies or bad guys to fight. It's just you and your computer. And the game isn't just you solving puzzles. You're actively under surveillance. If you spend too long online, hackers can attack you. If you make too much progress, people start coming for you. It's a tricky balance of exploring the dark web with checking your surroundings and defending yourself, really forcing you to always be on edge, never fully safe. So as you play the game as just a simple, curious person exploring the deep web in order to find the elusive Red Room, if you fail to defend yourself or take too long or get caught, you will be kidnapped and the game ends, implying that you've become the next victim of the Red Room. Duck Season. Duck Season was a VR first-person game released in 2017 by Stress Level Zero. And at first glance, Duck Season would look like a lighthearted VR homage to the early 1980s and 1990s video games, mainly Duck Hunt on the NES. You play as a kid in 1988 who just rented a new game called Duck Season. But as you play the game, you very quickly come to the realization that this game is breaking the fourth wall, and you realize the horror isn't just inside the TV, it's in your house. You as the player sit in your living room, playing the realistic duck hunting game, and you use your in-game shotgun to shoot ducks while being assisted by a smiling humanoid dog. And between hunts, you can interact with everything around you. VHS tapes, toys, magazine, your mom, the kitchen, pretty much anything. But between each round, something starts to feel slightly off. The dog's movements aren't too human. The world starts to feel funny, and as the day goes on, it starts to become clear that this dog isn't part of the game anymore. He starts behaving very strangely, staring directly at you, glitching, and occasionally appearing in a reflection in the living room. And as you watch VHS tapes hidden around the house, you come to the realization that this game may be haunted, or part of some mind control experiment. And after several more rounds, the dog starts to break out of the game world entirely. You'll occasionally see him standing behind you in your house, or watching from a hallway. And if you turn around too fast, he disappears. And eventually, when you stop playing the game or finish the final round, the dog is completely in your world, and he murders your mother and stalks you through the home and tries to kill you too. Now, this is one of those horror games that have multiple endings, and depending on your actions throughout the game, there are a variety of ways that things can turn out. But one thing is definitely for certain. If you see an old video game that's giving you funny feelings, maybe don't play it. Papers, Please. Papers, Please was released in 2013 by Lucas Pope, and it's a very simple game. You work as a checkpoint inspector at the Greston Porter, and decide who gets to enter the country and who gets turned away. Your character is just a regular citizen who's been lucky enough to win the labor lottery and get assigned to the border checkpoint. At first, the job is simple: inspect passports and let citizens in. But as political tensions rise, terrorists attack the border, and the government responds with stricter controls. You start encountering refugees, spies, revolutionaries, and people begging for mercy. Some plead for asylum, while some are trying to smuggle drugs. Some are trying to escape abusive regimes, and you, sitting in your booth, have to decide their fate in seconds. And over time, you'll eventually be contacted by a resistant group called EZIC, who wants to overthrow the corrupt government. And depending on your actions, the game has a variety of different endings, such as being executed for treason, escaping with your family, dying in prison, or a multitude of other endings. This isn't just bureaucratic horror, it's emotional numbness. Doing nothing but sitting in a little booth, checking people's papers, and deciding their fate in an instant. I Have No Mouth, and I Must Scream. Based on the 1967 short story by Harlan Ellison, this 1995 game adaptation is considered to be a masterpiece of psychological existential horror. Developed by Cyber Dreams, this game is a bleak vision of a post-apocalyptic world where a rogue supercomputer named AM has exterminated humanity, keeping only 5 survivors alive for over a century to torture them endlessly. The game is a point-and-click adventure game, but unlike most games of that era, this one focuses on psychological puzzles and moral dilemmas. You control 5 human survivors, each representing a particular sin or moral flaw, such as Gorster, a depressed man haunted by the guilt over his wife's institutionalization, or Ellen, a brilliant engineer suffering from trauma after being sexually assaulted, or Benny, a former military officer. And you also have Nimdok, a Nazi doctor forced to confront the atrocities he committed, and Ted, a narcissistic liar obsessed with appearance and self-preservation. And each character must confront a personal hell created by AM, where puzzles and moral decisions test their guilt, empathy, and redemption. And if you, as the player, are able to guide all 5 characters to moments of moral clarity, overcoming their flaws rather than giving in to AM's manipulation, they can unite to confront AM's core. And depending on your actions, you can either get the good ending or the bad ending. I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream is often cited as one of the best narrative horror games ever made, and that's pretty impressive with this coming out in 1995. Don't Take This Risk. Don't Take This Risk is a soft horror visual novel by Poison Apple Tales, and it's relatively short, only being about 5 to 10 minutes long. You play as a young woman who receives a phone call from a random man that believes he is dialing the suicide hotline, and the game is framed around your attempts to prevent him from harming himself. The core mechanic is dialogue choice under pressure, and sometimes you have to respond quickly or let the time run out. And all depending on your choices, endings can include him himself, you being trapped in a twisted relationship, or you escaping but emotionally scarred. The game strongly plays on guilt and emotional manipulation, and the question of how far would you go to save someone. With around 9 total endings in the original version, there are plenty of dark ways that this game can turn out. Grape play. Now, I'm assuming you guys can figure out the actual name of this game, because it is definitely not talking about the fruit. But on the surface, Grape, with a G YouTube, play presents a narrative framework. The game doesn't follow traditional storytelling. Instead, it relies on interaction with grotesque visuals and text prompts to deliver its story. The gameplay is kind of stripped down to basically nothing. There's no puzzles, combat, skill-based mechanics to speak of. Interaction is pretty limited, just clicking through screens or engaging with the game's very disturbing imagery. The game was of course made in Japan back in 2006, and was discovered by Western audiences around 2009. And this game actually had a pretty significant impact. After a huge public outcry, Amazon Japan and other distributors had to pull it from sale, and the Japanese government even had to introduce stricter regulations on depictions of sexual violence in interactive media. And of course, this backlash led to international policy discussions about the limits of artistic freedoms in games. Now, if you were just so dense you couldn't figure out what this game is about, well, let me give you a brief summary. You play as a diddle offender who has a history of previous arrests and also happens to be the son of a high-ranking public official. With his release, he stalks and subsequently grapes with a G, a widowed 42-year-old mother and her 2 daughters, being 17 and 12. And of course, after graping with a G like the fruit.
He's the grapist. The grapist? That's his name?
The Grapist, classic.
You unlock free play mode, where you can engage in consensual with the 3 women. Dude, Japan, come on. Your Boyfriend. Your Boyfriend first released with a demo back in 2019, and at first glance, it seems like a quirky little dating sim. But you very soon realize that it deals in more than just dating. It starts to dive into obsession, coercion, and psychological manipulation. And because of its disturbing tone and not safe for work content, it of course eventually got removed from a lot of major hosting platforms. But despite that, many players have actually praised the game for how it deconstructed the yandere romance fantasy, showing how terrifying this would actually be. The game has you playing as the protagonist, where you come across a strange man, simply known as your boyfriend. And at first he seems like a shy, awkward kind of guy. But as you get further in the game, your dialogue choices determine how quickly he grows attached. And no matter what you do, his behavior becomes increasingly possessive, controlling, and violent. And as the tone begins to shift from flirty responses to becoming absolutely obsessed with you, he starts stalking you and invading your privacy and isolating you from your friends. And the game's narration soon begins to break, with his voice overriding the text. And depending on your choices, you can get a variety of endings. The game really does a fantastic job at capturing that unsettling realism, showing you that having a yandere romance in your life probably isn't what you would expect it to be. Mad Father. Mad Father was a 2012 game originally released in Japan, and eventually remade in 2020. It's a 2D exploration-based horror game with puzzles and chase mechanics. You play as Aya Drevis, an 11-year-old girl living in a mansion with her scientist father and his assistant Maria. And the gameplay revolves around exploring the mansion, solving puzzles, and collecting key items, all while avoiding supernatural entities and grotesque experiments that roam the halls. You read diaries, discover backstory through notes and journals, and slowly piece together the truth about your family. The story begins on the anniversary of Aya's mother's death. Strange noises echo throughout the house, and corpses begin to stir. Aya soon realizes that her father's laboratory experiments have unleashed something terrible. Her father is a brilliant but slightly deranged scientist who performs inhuman experiments on living people, transforming them into dolls or grotesque creatures, all for the sake of what he calls beauty. And Aya's mother, Monica, discovered these crimes before she died, and her spirit still lingers around the mansion, trying to protect her daughter from sharing these same fate. And as Aya delves deeper, she uncovers hidden rooms filled with corpses and realizes her father has plans to turn her into one of these perfect dolls. And depending on how you go through the game, you can get one of a couple endings, where Aya's father dies, but Maria knocks her out and kills her and turns her body into a doll. Or you could get the bad ending, where Aya fails to escape and becomes one of her father's creations. Or lastly, you could get the true ending, where Aya learns the full truth, accepts what her father has done, and still chooses to carry on his legacy, hinting that love and obsession have completely warped her morality. Mad Father is now considered a cult classic among indie horror fans, and has inspired countless other games to follow it. And with its childlike art style and morbid story, I can definitely see why. Kanye Quest 3030. Released in 2013, which feels like forever ago, on the surface, Kanye Quest 3030 looks like a parody RPG, a little funny, lighthearted game about Kanye West. But what really made this game kind of disturbing wasn't the humor, it was the hidden content buried inside of it. At first, Kanye Quest 3030 feels like a normal RPG, kind of similar to like Pokemon or something. You play as Kanye West, accidentally transported into a dystopian future, where clones of famous rappers rule the world, and you battle enemies like other rappers' clones using rap-themed attacks. But after some time, players soon started to discover things about this game. Eventually, players discovered a hidden section in the game that completely changed the meaning. By typing the word ascend in a specific terminal, the player could unlock a secret base that stripped away the humor and turned the game into a cryptic, cult-like simulation. And inside this hidden section, the player is identified by a number and not a name. NPCs begin to talk about ascension, enlightenment, and transcendence of ego. And the game will even go on to ask you to input your real name, and later states that it is uploading your consciousness to the server. And after that, the game just ends, silently. And of course, something like that is going to cause a lot of theories and speculation. A lot of players just saw it as probably what it was, a joke. But others believed it to be a legitimate recruit test for a real cult, known as the Ascensionism, which is a group that claims to transcend physical reality through technology. So, is Kanye Quest just a silly little game poking fun at Kanye? Or is it a recruitment for a secret cult? It's the first one, it's the first one. The creator came out like 3 years ago and said this was a high school project, and that's it. But it's way more fun to believe the cult stuff, so that's what I'm gonna believe. Discover My Body. Discover My Body was released in 2020 by indie developer Yames. Discover My Body isn't a long game and can be finished relatively quick at only around 15 minutes. But in that short time, it can definitely leave an impact. The premise is actually quite simple. You're a medical intern, sitting across from a volunteer subject in a dimly lit room. In a world where traditional institutions, religions, governments have failed to give humans a proper connection, the subject is voluntarily choosing to integrate with a very powerful fungus in order to achieve some kind of unity. And at first, you just click and scan different parts of his body following instructions. It feels kind of clinical and even mundane, but things start to change very, very quickly. The man's body starts sprouting strange symbols, pulsating growths, and grotesque anomalies. His calm narration becomes philosophical, almost sermon-like. He talks about evolution, transcendence, and humanity merging with something larger, something we can't even really comprehend. That's where this game shifts from horror to something more existential. The man is not being consumed by a parasite, nor is he just dying. He is willingly transforming. He speaks about the communal body, a hive mind where individuality dissolves, and human identity melts into something new. Now, some players have accused this game of being nothing more than shock humor, using grotesque imagery to disturb without real payoff. But others have argued the complete opposite, that this game is actually a commentary on transhumanism, and the way technology is changing us. The merging of man and machine, the erosion of privacy, the complete disappearance of individuality into the collective hive mind of the internet. Then there's also, of course, the cult stuff. Many people have compared the game's dialogue and imagery to real-life cult indoctrination, with the subject's calm tone feeling eerily like a recruitment pitch for a new religion. Some even speculated that the developer deliberately designed it to mimic the rhetoric of post-humanist philosophy groups, those who genuinely believe humanity should evolve into a shared digital consciousness. Now, whether you want to believe all that or not, one thing is clear. Discover My Body lingers. It's short, it's ugly, it's disturbing, but it does stick with you. And it kind of makes you wonder, is this body horror or just a glimpse of the future? Don't Open Your Eyes. Don't Open Your Eyes was released in 2019 by indie developer Via. This is a visual novel style horror game, but unlike most horror titles, there's no monsters chasing you, no blood, no gore. Instead, the entire experience plays out in near total darkness. You play as yourself, trying to sleep in your bed. The room is silent until a voice begins to speak. A stranger with Epstein-like motives has entered your room. You can't see them, and you don't know what they look like. All you know is that they're there, next to you, whispering. The game unfolds as an interactive conversation. This stranger, whatever it is, asks you questions about itself. It wonders what kind of eyes it might have, what kind of mouth, and so on and so on. And as you answer, you begin to shape the monster in your imagination. This is where the game starts to become a little terrifying. The creature is never fully shown unless you guide it towards revealing itself. The horror lives in your own mind, filling in the gaps with whatever unsettles you the most. Now, of course, with the majority of other games, there's a little controversy. While Don't Open Your Eyes is not an explicitly graphic game, it did stir debates because of its psychological impact. Some players have reported feeling genuine paranoia after playing this game, unable to sleep because the experience blurred too closely with reality. And all it does is play on your childish fear, the dark, the unseen. And that's why Don't Open Your Eyes is so effective. It weaponizes imagination. It doesn't need gore or cheap jump scares. It lets your mind do all the work. And in doing so, it makes you wonder if you've invited something into your own space.
Open, open, open. Open, open, open.
Thrill Kill. Thrill Kill is a rather infamous game, or never officially being released. Developed in 1998 by Paradox Development and originally slated for the PlayStation, Thrill Kill was meant to be a competitive 3D fighting game, designed to rival Mortal Kombat in a way. But what made it truly shocking wasn't just the fighting mechanics, it was the level of gore and satanism that the developers intended to include. The game's concept was fairly simple. Contestants are trapped in a demonic underground tournament where only one can survive. Each character has their own unique fighting style and a horrifying backstory, often involving murder, occult rituals, or some other grotesque acts. The finishing moves, known as thrill kills, were meant to be brutally cinematic, often depicting characters being torn apart, set on fire, impaled, and much more. Again, very similar to Mortal Kombat. But with them trying to put all that in one game, of course it led to it being cancelled. Although it was fully completed and even reviewed by gaming magazines, its publisher, Virgin Interactive, which eventually was bought out by EA the same year, pulled the plug due to concerns over the mature content. Copies of the unfinished game were eventually leaked, allowing it to gain a cult following among fighting game enthusiasts and collectors. It very quickly became a legend, partly because of what it represented, a game so violent that even the late 90s era of shock value games was considered too extreme. But of course, the controversy never ends where it should end. Rumors swirled that Thrill Kill's dark energy went beyond the screen. Some players claimed that those who managed to get their hands on the leaked disc experienced bizarre glitches or corrupt saves, fueling stories that the game itself carried a kind of cursed energy. Well, of course, every game that gets cancelled has some sort of legend around it like this. It just did nothing but add to the game's infamy. Now today, Thrill Kill is remembered not just for its violence, but for its cultural significance. It's a reminder of a time where developers tried to push boundaries in a way that mainstream publishers weren't really ready to handle. Its influence can be seen in later fighting games, but the game itself remains frozen in obscurity, a ghost of gaming's darker ambitions. The Uncle Who Works for Nintendo. The Uncle Who Works for Nintendo was a horror game released by Michael Lutz in October of 2014. The game is set in the late 1990s, where you play as an 11-year-old, spending the night at your friend's house. What could possibly go wrong? The friend seems to come from a wealthy family, as he owns strange and unreleased Nintendo games, explained by their claim that they have an uncle who works for Nintendo. As the night goes on, you talk, play games, and slowly notice odd details that just don't add up. The friend's parents mention that the uncle is coming at midnight, and through dialogue choices, you uncover eerie contradictions and forgotten memories. Like the time your friend bragged at school about catching an impossibly strong mew, saying their uncle helped. And this can all lead up to 6 possible endings. In the first 2, when the clock strikes midnight, the uncle arrives, an eldritch entity that ends up feeding on the protagonist. Calling home unlocks the other endings. In one, the friend simply disappears. In others, the house burns down, and you either leave or retrieve the cursed Game Boy, leading to your parents telling you that your uncle has a new job at Nintendo. The final ending reveals the truth. The Game Boy is connected to the creature, which trades power and games for human feeding. By breaking free and confronting it, the protagonist weakens the entity, saves the victims, and ends the cycle. The game closes with fragmented text about identity and self-worth being tied to gaming, before ending on the friendship between the 2 kids overcoming the horror. The Cat Lady. The Cat Lady is a 2012 game developed by Harvester Games, and it follows Susan Ashworth, a 40-year-old woman suffering from severe depression and living alone in an English apartment. Known by her neighbors as the Cat Lady, her only friends are stray cats that she lures in with her own piano. After finally deciding to end it all, she awakens in a surreal afterlife and meets the Queen of Maggots, a mysterious woman who grants her immortality and tasks her with killing 5 murderers known as parasites. Susan then wakes up in a hospital, unsure if it was all real. There, her doctor, Dr. Zellman, reveals himself to be one of the parasites, a serial killer who turns his victims into art. After he murders her, Susan resurrects, escapes his torture chamber, and kills him, realizing her encounter with the Queen was real. Back home, she meets Mitzi Hunt, a terminally ill woman seeking a room to rent. She reveals her boyfriend killed himself after being manipulated by an online troll called the Eye of Adam. She tracked the troll's location to Susan's building and wants to confront him before she dies. Their search is interrupted when another pair of parasites, a deranged couple, kidnap Susan. She escapes and kills them, then returns to a worried Mitzi. As they grow close, Susan opens up about her tragic past. Her daughter died from a pollen allergy, and her husband later drank himself to death. The pair eventually find the Eye of Adam, revealed to be a paralyzed man who incites people to take their own life online through a computer interface. Mitzi wants revenge, but Susan stops her, convincing her that killing him would solve nothing. They leave him alive, ensuring he'll spend the rest of his life powerless and alone. Months later, Mitzi dies from cancer, but Susan learns to live with her depression. She connects with others online, finding small comfort in friendship. Though she knows her illness will never vanish, she finally feels hopeful about the future. The Cat Lady is a very well-told story, heavily diving into themes of depression, and knowing that even though it'll never vanish, there is still some positivity out there. Of course, it wouldn't be on this list if there wasn't a little controversy. The Cat Lady was controversial for its unflinching depiction of mental illness. While some praised it for its mature storytelling and willingness to tackle difficult subjects, others, on the other hand, criticized it for being too graphic or triggering. The game doesn't shy away from suicide, self-harm, or psychological torment. But beyond controversy, the game has gained a cult following, precisely because it's unapologetic. The Cat Lady represents a horror that isn't built on jump scares or gore, but psychological weight and emotional resonance. It's a game that lingers long after you put down the controller, leaving a subtle but persistent unease that creeps into the back of your thoughts. Balsamito 2K18. This obscure indie title emerged from Brazilian internet culture, and is as bizarre as it is controversial. On the surface, it seems like a low-budget crude parody game, an over-the-top political satire featuring a caricature of Jair Bolsonaro, the former president of Brazil. Players control Balsamito in a pixelated world where the goal is often unclear. Like, it really just seems like you're walking around beating up women and minorities to stop communism, I guess. The controversy surrounding this game is twofold. First, many viewed it as deeply offensive, using real-world political figures in ways that some considered disrespectful or inflammatory. And there's the other side that claims that this game is supporting racism, homophobia, and sexism due to the numerous jokes that are made when they brutally murder people. And then there's even the Brazilian government, who really weren't too happy with this. Despite or rather perhaps because of, its chaotic nature, this game became a cult hit in certain corners of the internet. Its appeal isn't mainstream whatsoever, and maybe if we dabble in Brazilian internet, he would probably understand this game a little bit more. Banned from Equestria Daily. Banned from Equestria Daily is a perfect example of Democracy Manifest. It is a point-and-click sex game of My Little Pony, created by Pokey Hidden in August of 2015. It is a point-and-click game. However, it does have cutscenes and minigames that are all in third person. And the entire premise of the game is to befriend and do the they call it clopping with as many ponies as they can manage within 3 game days. And in order to achieve this, the player must interact with various objects and ponies and do minigames, and it's just, this is why Jesus is never gonna return. And believe it or not, there is somewhat of a plot. In the game, the player is lying in bed when all of a sudden Trixie appears and says to the player that she is about to make all his dreams come true. She then transports him to Equestria and turns him into a red male earth pony named Big Brian. And at this point, you're free to do whatever you want, and you know where that's gonna go. And of course, this game was very, very controversial. First of all, you're using a children's IP for adult content. This did not sit well with a lot of people. Even people in the My Little Pony fandom were very against this. Some others have pointed out that this game is promoting bestiality, which, I mean, yeah, it kind of is, I guess. So this game is essentially a very dark spot on the whole My Little Pony thing, and is what happens if you don't gatekeep your community hard enough. You get those weirdos coming in and making pony sex games. Battle Graper. Developed by a Japanese studio, of course it is, of course it is. Developed by a Japanese studio, Illusion, it looks like a standard 3D fighting game at first. Characters, combos, and flashy arenas. But the game became infamous for one reason. Can you take a wild guess at what it is? Well, there was a built-in mechanic that sexualizes the defeated opponent. This element wasn't hidden. It defined the game's identity and immediately triggered outrage. I wonder why. Outside Japan, Battle Graper with a G YouTube like the fruit was condemned for its depiction of sexualized violence and quickly banned or restricted on many platforms. Even in Japan, it sparked debate about censorship, ethics, and the limits of creative freedom. Technically, matches play like a 3D brawler, but the post-fight sequences push the experience into disturbing territory. For some players, it was shock for shock's sake. For others, an uncomfortable glimpse at how far adult games could go before crossing moral boundaries. Over time, curiosity turned into a cult artifact. Collectors discussed its buggy mechanics, rumored hidden files, and urban legends about secret content supposedly left by the developers. Whether real or imagined, these stories added to its mythos. Today, Battle Graper stands as a both cautionary tale and a snapshot of a boundary-pushing era in the Japanese gaming scene. It's remembered less for its gameplay and more for the conversations it provoked about art, morality, and where interactivity ends and exploitation begins. Splatter School. Splatter School is a 2D side-scroller. You follow Jessica, a Japanese schoolgirl whose principal done goofed. He read a cursed book unleashing monsters throughout her school. Armed with only a box cutter, she must fight her way through 5 increasingly violent stages and face her own corrupt principal. Now the story is kinda meh. This is not a story game. This is a fetish game. It's pretty obvious. And it's not like the game is pretending to be anything else. It knows what it is. The core hook of this game was extreme sexualized death scenes. That's where their moneymaker is. After each defeat, you can trigger a unique hand-drawn scene, such as worms forcing their way through the protagonist's body, eyes being scooped out and used in certain acts, and disembowelments, and many, many more. Now, of course, this game caused a little bit of a stir, mainly because, you know, a schoolgirl is going through all these very adult acts, but also you top that up with the gore-like fetish, and that's just a recipe for disaster. But there's also a lot of people that praise the game and say it's actually genuinely good. Even without all those certain scenes, people still praise it for being a fun and entertaining game. Me, personally, I'm I'm gonna stay away from anything that involves schoolgirls getting worms put inside of them. That's a big no for me, boss. 177. 177 is one of the most infamous games in Japan's history. It was released in 1986 and developed and published by Macadamian Soft. And in case you didn't know, the reason it is called 177 is because 177 is the Japanese criminal code that forbids non-consensual adult activities. And you might be wondering, well, what does that have to do with the game? Oh, silly little you, let me explain. 177 is a side-scrolling arcade game in which the player has to prevent the girl from reaching her house, and you avoid hazards such as barriers, stones, animals, and random other objects. And in order to help make sure that the girl does not get home, you can throw stones at her to make her choose a different path that does not lead to her house. And once you have successfully caught the girl, the game switches to a very different type of game. A more adult-oriented type of game, in which you use the arrow keys to help with your character's movements. And the goal is to satisfy the girl. If you fail, you get arrested. If you succeed, you marry her for some reason. This game is weird. If you didn't know, this is another fruit game, you know, the grapes. Because, you know, you're just chasing women down at night and forcefully doing things to them. But 177 was eventually banned by retail by the National Diet, which is the national legislature of Japan. And it eventually had to be edited and re-released. Now, there were games that involved the fruit, grapes, before this game, but this one was so hardcore that the government actually had to step in this time. And from everything I've seen, I don't think this game ever left Japan. Thank God. Milk inside a bag of milk. Milk inside a bag of milk inside a bag of milk is a 2020 visual novel developed by Nikita Krukov. And the game centers around our protagonist, who visits a grocery market to purchase a bag of milk, but is troubled with the challenges of suffering from severe trauma, and you play as a voice inside of her head in which she shares her innermost dialogue with. The game starts in first person, as you accompany a girl to buy a bag of milk for her mother. Her simple tasks become very difficult due to anxiety, intrusive thoughts, and her struggle to even speak to the cashier. The player must guide her through reminders to pick up and pay for the milk, while she experiences hallucinations and confusion. Outside, she nearly gets hit by a truck, but imagines it as a bear instead. And depending on player choices, she eventually breaks the fourth wall, revealing her trauma, including when her father took his own life, and her ongoing mental struggles. Afterward, she returns home, hearing unsettling melodies caused by her medication. The game ends with her spending time on her apartment rooftop before her mother tells her to go to bed. Now, this game has an overwhelmingly positive reception. People have praised it for how it portrays mental health struggles in a very raw way, and people even love the gameplay. Many find that the audio-visual jolt effects, the distorted visuals, and unsettling sound design all work together to invoke anxiety and help confuse the player. And the concept of making a mundane task like buying milk into a whole psychological ordeal resonates a lot with people in a clever way to depict internal struggles. So this game was not really controversial, but it was definitely tackling a lot of problems that people go through on a daily basis. Quest for Bush. In 2006, this game may or may not have caused a little bit of international kerfuffle. But to understand everything, let's go back to 2003, when an indie developer released Quest for Saddam, a crude first-person shooter where you fought Iraqi soldiers and killed Saddam Hussein. 3 years later, a jihadist media group called the Global Islamic Media Front took that game, modded it, and flipped the script. Their version, Quest for Bush, or also called The Night of Bush Capturing, came out on September 11th, 2006. The timing was most certainly deliberate, and their goal was clear: use gaming as propaganda. The game is basically Quest for Saddam, but with swapped textures. Same engine, same levels, just reskinned. You play as a fighter battling through 6 stages. Each level gets tougher until you reach the final boss, George W. Bush himself. The gameplay is very simple. You just run, shoot, and repeat. Now, almost instantly, Quest for Bush became infamous. Major outlets like the Washington Post covered it as proof of how video games could become tools of extremist propaganda. Then in 2008, Iraqi-American artist Wafa Balil took it further with his art piece Virtual Jihad, a modified version meant to critique both terrorism and the US war policy. That exhibit was banned by his university, sparking a heated debate about censorship, free speech, and the political power of games. Now, Quest for Bush was barely playable, but the message did hit pretty hard. From parody to propaganda, the lines seemed blurred, and I find it really funny that no one seemed to care that Quest for Saddam was a thing until they flipped it around and made it Quest for Bush. Man, the early 2000s were like a weird time in America. Kill the Maggots. Now, the game's title isn't actually Kill the Maggots, it's something else, and I'll let you use your imagination to figure out what it is. But in 2015, an indie game suddenly appeared on Steam that caused instant outrage and vanished within hours. The game came from a small studio called Skaldic Games, led by developer Randall Herman, a musician known for anti-LGBT commentary. Released through Steam Greenlight in 2015, the game claimed to satirize political correctness, but its content seemed to be anything but satire. Within minutes of release, players noticed it awarded points for shooting gay and transgender characters, and deducted points for killing straight ones. Steam users immediately reported the game en masse. Now, mechanically, this game was a basic arcade-style light gun shooter. Aim, shoot, and repeat. Nothing too complex whatsoever. Each hit earned you points and graphic feedback. The gameplay was shallow, but the message was impossible to ignore. Even for 2015's rough indie scene, it definitely crossed the line. Now, within hours, the backlash exploded. Steam's community forums flooded with outrage, and LGBT groups condemned it as hate speech disguised as parody. Valve, who ran Steam, removed it the same day, citing violations of their anti-harassment policy. The game's creator defended the game, saying it was meant to mock extremes of political correctness, but most saw that as just an excuse. YouTubers and journalists labeled it as the most offensive game ever made, while others pointed to it as proof of how broken Steam Greenlight had become, allowing almost anything to be published without oversight. Kill the Maggots only existed for a few hours, but its impact lasted years. It forced Valve to rethink how games reach Steam, and would become a warning about what happens when free speech collides with open publishing. Crude, hateful, and short-lived, it all culminated into a perfect storm of controversy that shows how a single upload can ignite a global debate. Walk. Sanpo, or Walk, which was developed by Kazumi Game Studio, is a perfect example of a lo-fi, atmospheric survival horror game. First released as a short demo on the haunted PS1 demo disc 2021, it very quickly gained a lot of attention for its unique aesthetic and unrelenting tension. The game's title just simply means a walk, but there's definitely a lot more to it than it seems. You play as a young schoolgirl wandering the empty suburban streets of Japan at twilight, just trying to get home. The PS1 style visuals, low poly models, and wobbly geometry and dithered textures turn technical limitations into atmosphere, while the unnatural silent neighborhoods and flickering vending machines create a haunting sense of unease. Now, this game has no combat, so there's no weapons. The gameplay revolves around stealth and evasion, and you making smart movements. You can only run, hide, or take another path. The main antagonist is a tall, silent figure known as the Shadow, or lanky crow being, and hunts you relentlessly. The game has classic fixed camera angles that heighten the fear, obscuring your view and forcing you to act without knowing what's ahead. The most unsettling feature is how the game treats failure. Being caught doesn't trigger a traditional "game over, try again." Instead, you wake up where you left off, but the world has changed. The lighting darkens, paths distort, and the atmosphere grows more oppressive. Each death deepens the nightmare, turning the simple act of walking home into a descent into hell. Both the creature and the setting of the game draw heavily from Japanese folklore. The Shadow echoes Hachishaku-sama, the 8-foot tall woman, a spirit said to prey on children. The game goes even deeper, connecting Japanese ghost stories with Finnish mythology. Hidden clues and multiple endings hint at parallels with the... how the fuck do you pronounce this? Hidden clues and multiple endings hint at parallels with the Kalevala, Finland's national epic. Others have said that this is a tengu, a bird-like demon from Japanese folklore. This would explain all of the crows seen flying around the town and the feathers and claws that the monster has. Ultimately, Walk is about subtle and quiet horror. terror born from atmosphere and not blood and gore. The game turns a simple stroll into an escalating nightmare of fear and meaning. With its pitch-perfect retro aesthetic, haunting folklore, and lair mythology, Walk stands as one of the most chilling indie horror experiences of the modern era. Silence of the Damned. Silence of the Damned is a Japanese indie doujin horror game released in 2020. The story follows Melise, a nurse trapped in a closed ward that's becoming a waking nightmare. She's trying to escape as reality slips, and the hospital fills with twisted threats. The gameplay is 2D, pixel art horror with side view exploration. You navigate wards and corridors, avoid or route around hostile enemies, and solve basic puzzles. Get keys, power gates, and so on. Now, because this is a Japanese horror game, there's more to it than just that. Let me read you a couple of the tags that I found for this game on a website. Internal exhibition of SEX, monster birth, monster grapes, slime monster grapes, tentacle grapes. It seems like there's a common theme with monsters and the fruit in this game for some reason. Now, there really isn't much that I could find about this game. It seems like one of those more lesser known games that just happens to include a bunch of tentacles and stuff. But I mean, if you're into like niche Japanese indie horror and like short games that are unapologetically adult, then maybe this is the game for you, I guess. I mean, the art style is pretty cool, so there's that. Morimiya Middle School. Every few years, an indie horror game surfaces that just blatantly crosses the line. Not with monsters, ghosts, or gore, but something kinda real. In 2018, a Japanese RPG Maker title called Morimiya Middle School Shooting appeared online and quickly vanished. Developed by a small independent creator known as Eric, Morimiya was built in RPG Maker MV, but this isn't your typical pixel horror game, unfortunately. Instead, it followed a young girl spiraling around personal tragedy, a broken home, isolation, resentment. Her story unfolds inside a fictional Japanese middle school, where the player slowly realizes her thoughts have turned towards revenge. And mechanically, the game plays like a top-down action shooter. The player navigates classrooms and corridors, using limited stamina, managing weapons, and racing against a short timer. But beneath the gameplay is a deliberately bleak atmosphere, eerie silence, static corridors, and notes describing the protagonist's mental collapse. There's no twist or redemption or anything, just the ultimate inevitability. And many players have described the experience as emotionally sickening, not because of gore or anything else, but mainly for the fact that it feels too real. In the game, some students will play dead, and even scream out why right before you take their life. When the game surfaced, it was immediately met with outrage, surprise, but also fascination. Some argued it was a form of shock art, like Super Columbine Massacre RPG, intended to explore the psychology of violence. Others saw it as exploitation, a game that risked glorifying real-world tragedy for shock value. Mainstream platforms absolutely refused to host it, and most official links were taken down. And today it really only survives through re-uploads, fan archives, and moral debate. And to this day, remains as one of the most infamous lost RPG Maker projects ever made. And perhaps some would say that's where it should stay. Buried, but never forgotten. Boyfriend to Death. Dating sims usually promise love, comfort, and maybe a few awkward laughs, but Boyfriend to Death takes that idea and twists it into something truly unsettling. Released in 2016 by a small indie team, Boyfriend to Death was built like a traditional dating sim. Text choices, branching dialogue, and multiple endings. But instead of chasing affection, you're just trying to survive. The story begins with your character, bored and lonely, deciding to head out for a little night on the town, where depending on where you go, you can meet one of three men, each charming, attractive, and immediately suspicious. And with concepts in the game that include torture, grapes, and psychological abuse, you can only assume as to where this is going. Now, each route that you can go down features a distinct sadistic boyfriend. Route 1, Strayed. He is a cheerful, easily overexcited sociopath. His route often features extreme abuse and a character named Ren, a fox beastkin who suffers from severe Stockholm syndrome due to years of his abuse. Route 2, Ryer. He's a charming and powerful demon with the ability to summon tentacles. Oh god, I already know where that one's going. Or you can go Route 3 and go with Sano. Sano is a calculating man with a chilling demeanor and a dark specialty in human experimentation. This route also introduces his twin Akira and his pet monster, Sean. That's alright, I don't know why that made me laugh, but having a pet monster just named Sean is hilarious. The core gameplay involves navigating dialogue choices to determine whether the protagonist lives or dies, and how much they suffer in between. And there are a lot of endings, and majority of them end with you going through hell, like getting your head chopped off, getting new holes, quote unquote, getting your gut split open, but there's also some where you win, and you kill your attacker, and Ren, the Stockholm guy, eats the dude's heart and keeps his body in a freezer for a couple years. That's totally normal. And when the game released, Boyfriend to Death became a cult phenomenon. Some praised it for pushing boundaries and confronting taboo fears about intimacy and control, while others condemned it for going far too far, you know, calling it exploitative and even dangerous. But love it or hate it, the game definitely left its mark. It proved that sometimes to creep people out, all you have to do is have someone smile and say, I love you. Jesus Strikes Back. Jesus Strikes Back Judgment Day was created by a small studio called 2Gen Pro, also known as 2 Genders Productions. The first version appeared in early 2019 with a remastered edition, of course, released on June 10th, 2020. The game is set in the year 2028, where a global new world order led by reptilian billionaires that are just caricatures of real-life figures like George Soros or Mark Zuckerberg. I'm not too quite sure on that Mark Zuckerberg one. He might actually be a lizard man. Have you ever seen him do like an interview? Ever?
Because you're human, and I was human. I am human, still.
Reptilian billionaires have taken over. Straight men are outlawed. Society has collapsed. And Jesus returns, armed and ready to upload facts and logic to free humanity. Oh yeah, I guess this game did come out during like the whole Ben Shapiro facts and logic debating college kids days. Man, that feels like forever ago. But gameplay features multiple playable characters based on political and internet icons, battling across absurd, exaggerated environments. It looks like a low-budget parody of an action shooter, but the ridiculousness part is what made it go viral. But if we just dig a little deeper, the humor turns slightly unsettling. Beneath the satire lies a world filled with ideological references, conspiracy imagery, and loaded symbolism, with missions in fake news studios, government buildings, and twisted social media headquarters. The developers claimed it was all parody, a tongue-in-cheek mockery of modern politics and culture wars. But of course, many players saw something else, a message too pointed and specific to be pure comedy. The controversy began with the characters themselves. Alongside Jesus, players could control Donald Trump, Small Mustache Man, and Mussolini, and other infamous figures portrayed as anti-heroes fighting a progressive empire. Of course, critics quickly labeled it as extreme propaganda and not satire. Even the original sale price, $14.88, references a well-known white supremacist slogan. Combined with imagery of reptilian overlords, satanic globalists, and rainbow flag armies, the game mashed together nearly every major internet conspiracy theory. And honestly, you gotta give it a little credit for that, being able to include that many. But some argued it marked far-right beliefs by exaggerating them to absurdity. Others believed it used irony as camouflage for genuine extremism. And you know you've done a good job when you've pissed off both sides. Eventually, Steam banned the game, citing trolling and offensive content. But fans continued to share it privately, claiming that censorship only proved the game's message. A sequel, because of course there is, Jesus Strikes Back 2: The Resurrection, was teased, hinting at a final war between heaven and a digital version of hell, where uploading facts and logic becomes a literal salvation mechanic. In the end, Jesus Strikes Back Judgment Day isn't remembered for its gameplay or graphics, but for the questions it raised. Was it a joke, a warning, or something much darker? It seems like everybody has a different answer. Special Operation 85. Special Operation 85 was developed by the Islamic Republic of Iran's Union of Students, that is a long name, and released around 2006 for PC. It was designed as a response to Western war-themed shooters, which often portrayed US military actions as heroic. So, Special Operation 85 flipped the script. The story follows a fictional Iranian agent sent to rescue two nuclear scientists, kidnapped by the US and Israeli forces. The title's number 85 references a supposed CIA operation linked to the abduction. For the developers, the game wasn't meant to entertain. It was a cultural statement, digital propaganda meant to counter Western narratives about Iran and the Middle East. And at first glance, it looks just like a low-budget Call of Duty clone. First-person combat, objectives, and small linear missions. Players fight through military bases, deserts, and urban war zones while facing American and Israeli forces. The graphics crude, mechanics stiff, but the messaging is overt. Each mission begins with a patriotic quote and a new style briefing about Western aggression, painting the player as a righteous defender rather than an invader. Every element reinforces the same theme: Iran as the victim of a global conspiracy, fighting back through courage and faith. And of course, with a game like this, there's going to be a little controversy. The game would go on to spark immediate international backlash. Western media outlets accused it of spreading anti-American and anti-Semitic propaganda, while Iranian state outlets defended it as a legitimate counter-narrative to the US cultural invasion. Gaming journalists dismissed it as a crude political theater, yet its very existence made headlines. Many critics pointed out that Special Operation 85 was part of a wider digital propaganda war emerging in the mid-2000s. In the West, games like America's Army were openly funded by the US military to promote enlistment. Iran's response was this: a homegrown equivalent meant to instill patriotism and push back against Western dominance in media. While officially distributed in Iran, the game quickly became difficult to find elsewhere. Western hosting sites refused to mirror it, citing political and ethical reasons. For years, it circulated only through torrents and obscure file sharing forums, where it was often mislabeled or repackaged with fan-made edits. This scarcity turned it into a piece of digital folklore, a forbidden title whispered about on lost media threads and political gaming forums. Now, whether you see it as propaganda or protest, all depends on which side of it you're looking from. It stands as a haunting example of how interactive media can be used to not just entertain, but to persuade. Lolita Syndrome. This one, it's taken us back to Japan. Goddamn you, Japan. In the early 1980s, Japan's home computer scene was exploding. Small studios were experimenting freely. One of those small studios happened to be Enix, years before Dragon Quest, published a short game by Hiroshi Yamauchi under the title Lolita Syndrome. It was marketed as an interactive adventure, but its content quickly made it notorious. The player takes on the role of a man attempting to, quote-unquote, rescue a young girl from traps inside a house. Failure triggers graphic, sexualized depictions of harm to a child, rendered in crude pixel art, but unmistakable in the intent. Even for the anything goes attitude of the early Japanese computer gaming scene, it was shocking. Reaction was immediate. Critics, parents, and even the developers condemned Lolita Syndrome for eroticizing violence against minors. Enix quietly pulled it from their shelves within months, and it has never been re-released or officially acknowledged since. Because Japan had almost no rating system at the time, Lolita Syndrome became part of the debate that eventually led to self-regulation in adult PC games, and later the EOCS, the Ethics Organization of Computer Software. Its existence is still cited in discussions about censorship, artistic freedom, and exploitation in interactive media. Outside Japan, the game spread only through a handful of screenshots in retro magazines, and later through emulation leaks, where it became forbidden curiosity among lost media collectors. Most modern archives refuse to host it due to its illegal content, making it one of the rarest and most ethically controversial games of all time. Historically, Lolita Syndrome represents the dark side of early creative freedom. It showed how quickly the absence of regulation could lead developers to explore taboo material simply because they could. The scandal around it helped shape Japan's later standards and indirectly influenced how erotic and horror games were classified through the late 1980s and 1990s. In academic circles, it's sometimes discussed alongside works like Custer's Revenge in the West. Primitive, offensive, yet pivotal in forcing the industry to confront questions of morality and responsibility in interactive art. For most players though, Lolita Syndrome isn't a curiosity to be rediscovered. It's a reminder of how easily technology can amplify the worst aspects of imagination. Marichan Kiki Ipatsu. In 1983, long before Dragon Quest made Enix a household name, the company published a very different kind of game. One that they probably wish people would stop talking about. It was called Marichan Kiki Ipatsu, or Mary Chan's Close Call, an erotic, violent, and downright bizarre piece of early PC gaming history that blurred every line imaginable. Developed by manga artist Tadashi Makimura and released for Japanese home computers, Marichan was born out of Enix's 1982 Game and Hobby Programming Contest, the same event that helped discover some of Japan's first indie devs. Back then, erotic games were new territory. The art was hand-traced and programmed line by line. Primitive, but groundbreaking. And while today, Enix is remembered for family-friendly RPGs, this early experiment sits deep in their black history. The story is quite simple, yet disturbing. You play as someone trying to rescue a schoolgirl named Mariko, who's been kidnapped and trapped in a series of deadly situations: drowning, strangulation, electrocution, and so on. Each time that you save her though, she removes a piece of clothing. Beat every stage and your reward is a nude image. Every level plays out through rock, paper, scissors. You press F1, F2, or F3. The computer picks one too. Win, and you push back the danger. Lose, and Mariko dies. Players quickly learned that skill didn't matter. Just hammer the keys and hope for luck. For all its crude art and random gameplay, it was strangely tense. Each round felt like gambling with her life. Now, are you ready for the most disturbing part about this game? I guarantee you can't guess what it is. Just take a guess real quick. So Mary Chan's Close Call had a disc and a cassette tape version. And in the tape version, Mary Chan is voiced by Makimura's cousin, who was a high school student at the time of production. And what's even more disturbing is that Mary Chan is said to have been based on a said cousin. What the fuck? Now this game does share a lot of similarities with Lolita Syndrome. Like story-wise, Enix-wise, and contest-wise, they're very, very similar. But the reception for this game is pretty interesting. A lot of people just thought it was meh. One magazine gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. Another reviewer criticized that the adult content was weak. Now, Marichan Kiki Ipatsu isn't a good game, but it is a part of gaming history. Proof that creativity sometimes can go a little too far. So like next time you boot up like Dragon Quest, remember, before Slimes and Heroes, Enix once made a game about saving a girl from death just to see her naked. And she was underage. God damn you, Japan. Pigeon Blood. Pigeon Blood was a game made back in the early 2000s. I really couldn't find too much about what goes on in the game, but from this description alone, you should be able to tell. Hidden in the forest lies an extravagant residence. It is owned by our protagonist, only known as Chris. Chris is the latest in a family line of SPX slave trainers. His latest acquisition, a girl named Rita, is to be completely trained within 6 months. Our hero is also a bit of an enigma, for he has actually lost most of his memories. However, as the training of Rita continues, he begins to slowly piece together the fragmented events of his life. Chris will occasionally get help from his 2 assistants, conveniently each of them embodying either sadism or masochism. And in looking more into this, there was an anime, or I should say a GNTAI, made of this. And of course, for research purposes, I had to watch episode 1 to figure out if there actually was a deeper story. Spoiler alert, there is not. Now I'm not sure if this scene is in the game, but it was in the anime. I'm just gonna call it an anime for YouTube's sake. One slave, I guess, is like in chains and stuff, and wets herself, and then out of nowhere, like 10 other slaves come crawling in and start. And it was at that point, not even 5 minutes in, that I said, I'm done. So that's all I could really find on this game. Just seems like a S game. Doesn't seem like there was really much to it. My Lolita. I'm getting pretty sick and tired of having to Google games with the word lolly in it. I feel like the FBI is going to come crashing down my door any second. But you have to understand, in this era of Japanese gaming, there was a thing called the lolicon boom. You could probably guess what that is. But within Japanese anime, manga, and games, this was something that was really taking off. And your boy, Katsumi Mochizuki, the creator of Lolly Syndrome, decided to run it back in 1985. Thus, we got the game My Lolita. Almost the same exact game as Lolita Syndrome. Similar art styles, similar gameplay, very similar premise. But this time, Enix wanted nothing to do with it, and very rightfully so, and instead was released by a company called Koei. Now you might be wondering to yourself, what could this game possibly be about? How does it get worse than Lolita Syndrome? Well, let me explain. It is a doctor's play game that has you experimenting and basically torturing young little girls. Like doing things like cutting them open to remove cancer cells and extracting eggs to create cloned humans. Yeah, this guy really thought this one was going to be a knockout of the park. But surprising no one, this did not sell as well as its predecessor, and would probably be much less known if it wasn't for that iconic name, My Lolita. So we can all agree that Japan is awesome, but they definitely should have not been allowed to make games in the 80s. Grape Day. In 2019, a small indie visual novel suddenly appeared on Steam's upcoming release list, a game called Grape Day. It promised players the ability to verbally harass and kill people during a zombie apocalypse. That was the game's selling point. Hey, you can verbally harass. That was in the game's selling point. That's pretty funny. Within days, it became one of the most controversial games ever made. I'm just gonna call this game Grapes from now on. I'm just gonna call it Grapes. The game's description stated that players could interact with women during a zombie apocalypse, but community sleuths quickly uncovered that it explicitly depicted SA. Even the creator himself described the game as a dark comedy, inspired by various horror books and psychological thrillers. And even during the development of the game, he had to remove a scene in which a baby is murdered in order to avoid having the game labeled as child exploitation. And a warning was on the game's Steam page, marking the game as having mature content, including SA, necrophilia, and incest. Yeah. On the game's website, the game's creator, Deskplant, wrote that the game was intended for a very niche audience, including the 4% of the general population that are sociopaths. And he also wrote that banning a bundle of grapes in fiction would require banning murder and torture, adding that most people can separate fiction from reality pretty well, and those that can't shouldn't be playing video games. Within days, social media exploded. Gamers, journalists, and advocacy groups demanded Steam remove it before release. Valve initially stayed silent. For years, the company's stance had been that Steam should let everything on the store unless it's illegal or trolling. But as peer pressure grew from politicians, news outlets, and even Valve's own community, the company stepped in. On March 6, 2019, Valve announced it would not distribute Grapes, citing significant cost and risk in hosting content that poses danger and cost to Valve, developers, and customers. The debate that followed was explosive, of course. Some argued Valve was right, that giving a platform to a game glamorizing SA was very irresponsible, while the other side of the coin claimed censorship, saying even offensive art should have a right to exist. The game never released officially, but its notoriety spread far beyond its content. It became a case study in how digital storefronts navigate morality, legality, and free speech. Now, Grapes is gone. Its file scrubbed, its developers banned, but the question it raised remained. Where should platforms draw the line, and who decides what's too dangerous to sell? In the end, Grapes turned out to be less of a game than a flashpoint, one that forced the industry to confront the dark side of anything goes. No word tennis. In the world of retro gaming, ROM hacks are everywhere. Fan-made modifications of old titles that add new characters, levels, or even difficulty modes. But sometimes, when you start to get into certain areas of the internet, you get this. This so-called hack isn't a real game in the artistic sense. It's a very crude edit of an early tennis ROM, where someone replaced the original name and graphics with said slur. No new gameplay, no innovation, just that. And in the early 2000s, files like this circulated everywhere in ROM forums and emulation sites. And because the game was built from stolen assets, it never had an official release or developer. So the game itself is literally just a tennis game, with altered slurs here and there. The early internet days were truly the Wild West. Stormer Doom. Stormer Doom isn't necessarily a game. It's more of a mod for Doom 2. And I really couldn't find too much about this on the internet. Now, I have heard that there are downloads of this available out there somewhere, but I have no interest in getting that anywhere near my computer. But I did find one article online talking about it, and they describe it as, instead of killing demons, you're hunting Jews and communists. The mechanics of the game and its graphic depictions of violence are kept intact. The only difference is whom the blood is coming from. And in some of the screenshots that I have seen of the game, you're shooting Orthodox Jews, with US presidents on the walls wearing yarmulkes. And other than all that, I really couldn't find much more about it, but it seems like it's pretty cut and dry. It just replaced demons with Jewish people. So knowing that, the name Stormer starts to make a little bit more sense. 3 Tycoon. This was a game that was released in July 19, 1991 in Japan. And that makes the title make a little bit more sense, because 3 in Japanese is San. Santa-kun. Get it, Santa? And the game is listed as a quiz miscellaneous trivia game. But it is also categorized as an erotic quiz game. There's a much longer word that starts with a P that I don't think I can say. But one review that I found of the game states that Santa-kun is a Japanese quiz game. It goes really far. Girl is forced to take off an article of clothing. She is never happy to remove it. She always has a sort of violated look. Sometimes she cries. So that just lets you know where we stand already with this game. But the structure of the game challenges the player with quiz questions. If the player answers correctly, a girl character is made to remove clothing bit by bit. If wrong, Santa gets a point. And if Santa wins, the camera cuts to the girl showing visible distress, and she may cover herself or cry. And a Santa victory can end the game early and basically force you to restart. And just the idea that this is a game that you and Santa are going one-on-one in a quiz, and if you win, women are forced to get undressed. This premise of a game just makes no sense whatsoever. Dual Phase. I'm not even going to tell you where this game's from. You're just going to have to take an educated guess. But this is a short adult Yuri visual novel about twin sisters Nozomi and Kanami, whose relationship crosses lines. The game is around 1 hour long and was said to have been released around 2008. And it focuses on the sisters' codependent and increasingly possessive bond, and the anxiety of being split up by their parents' divorce. And some people have even said that it's more disturbing than erotic, and said that it makes them rather just uncomfortable. Now, there has been no official English release for this game. Allegedly, there was a fan translation patch a couple years ago, but has been since taken down, and it's rather difficult to find today. And in certain communities, this is frequently cited as one of the most notorious games, and usually shows up in lists that include the words worst, biggest, or shocking. Brown Mouth. Now, this is a game that's more of an urban legend than an actual game. A lot of people have said that it's literally just a hoax created by an Iceberg maker, which could be true, but other people also claim that it's a piece of lost media. But really the only information we have about this game is one website, and it says Brownmouth would have played out like this. In Brownmouth, you play as a deranged man who is disfigured named Mike Nasty. In the game, you must steal and drink tons of milk, which will fill the brown bar on your screen. When filled, you will have severe diarrhea. You can also kill anyone you come into contact with and eat them. His main goal seems to be to abduct little girls and tie them up in his home, where you must complete an action-timed game where he force feeds them his own feces, after which he will then cut them open and eat their insides, and finally snuggle with their empty bodies. Failing the event will cause a tumor in Mike's brain to grow and make the game harder to control. And it's also possible to sell the girls and their body parts for money, which you can spend on explosives that Mike can use to cause mass thingies. And also Mike has a pet goat, because why not? Which you can use to command to eat people. And you purchase outfits from said goat, including a maid outfit, a gimp suit, goth outfit, and plenty others. And that's just where I'm gonna stop reading, because it goes on and on. It just gets way weirder and more deranged as I read on. So whether Brownmouth is just a creepypasta, a hoax, or a piece of lost media, one thing is for certain, I'm just glad that you can't play this game. Hong Kong 97. Hong Kong 97 was an SNES game developed by Happysoft and was said to be a satire on the video game industry, and it was claimed to have only been made in 7 days. Hong Kong 97 sold only around 30 copies due to its underground bootleg release, and ever since then has kinda gained a cult-like following. The plot of the game takes place in, wouldn't you know it, Hong Kong in 1997, during the transfer of power from the UK back to China. And as this is happening, people from mainland China, who in the English script are referred to as ugly reds, and in the Japanese script are referred to as dirty people spitting sputum. So I'm starting to think that this might not be satire on the video game industry. But like I was saying, people from mainland China start immigrating to Hong Kong and cause an increase in the crime rates. And as a countermeasure, the Hong Kong government hires Chin, who is supposedly an unspecified relative of Bruce Lee, to quote-unquote wipe out the Red Communist. And what's even funnier is that the character Chin is Jackie Chan. Well, not like actually Jackie Chan. They used a picture of Jackie Chan taken from the 1984 film Wheels on Meals to depict the Chin character. And what's even funnier is the back of the insert of the game notes that Chin is a heroin addict. So this game was just all sorts of out there. Now, of course, with a game like that, you're going to have some controversy. The game is widely regarded as one of the worst or most bizarre video games ever made, with it being deeply offensive, with anti-Chinese and xenophobic language, and the mass genocide of an entire nation. And to top it all off, the usage of real corpse photos for death imagery. So it's not a surprise that this game is definitely infamous. In 2023, the creator made the game freely available to download from his website, which would just go on to further cement this game as a preserved relic of gaming oddities. Taiwan 2001. Taiwan 2001 is a parody of, take a guess, Hong Kong 97, and for a long time it was considered lost media, until around 2023 when footage of the game actually surfaced. And the intro for this game allegedly reads like such. The year 2001 has arrived. A herd of fucking uglies have rushed from mainland China. Crime rates have skyrocketed. Taiwan's government calls Wang Shou Min to reform the mainlanders, while in China there's a secret project to turn Wang Shou In into an ultimate weapon. And on the game over screen, in Chinese, it says Min is dead, and shows a digitized photograph of a CPR dummy. So a little different than the real corpses. And because the game is a riff on Hong Kong 97, it inherits some of the original's controversy, mainly anti-Chinese propaganda. Now, if there's anything that's for certain about Taiwan 2001, it's that they somehow made it look worse and just creepier than Hong Kong 97. Mall Predator game. This is a game that for a long time people thought was just a hoax or a piece of lost media, until recently when it was actually found. The game is named Arcade and is an indie RPG style game. You play as a dad searching for his missing child. But over time, as you continue to play the game, it starts to get darker and darker, and you realize that you are the predator. The game's pretty simple. You navigate areas like an arcade section at the mall, and you move things to clear paths, all while you have internal monologues that are frantic, like where could he be and I just saw him, until the game's ending, where the twist is revealed, that the father, you, are actually a child predator, and you end up cornering a child. The camera pans menacingly as the dad smiles and unzips his pants. Now, like I said, this game for a long time was considered lost media. No one even knew if this existed, and with a name like Arcade being extremely generic, it's no wonder why. If they would have went with the name that the community just gave to it, the Mall Predator game, it probably would have spread around like wildfire. But at least we can finally say that one of the most disturbing pieces of lost media has finally been found. So that is going to be the end of this video. What game disturbed you guys the most? I'm not gonna lie, the whole back-to-back Lolita games really just were not fun to look up. But let me know what you guys think down below in the comments. And with all that said, like, subscribe, and leave.